I'm noticing more and more right now, there's this discussion around efficiency. And I think the AI narrative that's being created, I'm hypothesizing that it is largely created by a lot of these tech CEOs pushing this idea of human workforce disruption and how you can just automate so many things.
Right.
What would be your message then for leaders who are perhaps really being driven right now to think about that efficiency discussion, changing the way that work is structured so that we can automate as much as possible and we can be as efficient as possible right now? How does empathy and a lot of these concepts of deep listening and connection, what's their place in this emerging reality that's coming up?
Yeah. Interesting. So the AI piece in particular here, we've gone really slow and we are making a real strong effort to speak to the fact that AI is not here to replace us. It's here to act as our support agents in our work in creating those efficiencies. Look, I've had the privilege of working across very different sectors: government, hospital, insurance, and now regulation. And what's interesting is that while these environments and mandates are changing, at the end of the day, our human dynamics have not. And in every setting, empathy has been, for me at least, the difference between organizations that crumble under pressure and those that rise stronger from it. And you think about a time in government where I spent part of my career at the Ministry of Health. Empathy really reshaped how we approached policy transformation. I recall vividly during one time of the annual budgeting planning process where there was this sort of intense discussion around programs that might be renewed and transformed or sunset. And it was easy at that point to get lost in numbers and spreadsheets. But the most effective leaders in that room were the ones who brought the conversation back to people, to patients, to families, to clinicians, to communities. And it was in that instance where I think for me, empathy reminded us that behind every budget line was a life impacted. And that lens helped us find solutions that were both fiscally responsible, yet human centered. And you mentioned AI and efficiencies. AI doesn't have the capacity to apply that EI, that emotional intelligence to these types of scenarios. I can think of another example when I worked at North York General Hospital. Empathy was the cornerstone of how we led through disruption. Healthcare can be high stakes, as we know it, and very emotionally charged, especially during times of system strain. And it was during that time that I saw firsthand how empathic leadership really took flight. Taking time to understand very important topics like staff burnout, fear, pride, how those could transform conflict into collaboration. When people felt heard, we didn't just improve morale, we improved quality and the safety of outcomes. I also look at, I mentioned I worked for quite some time also in insurance. And my time at Hurock, empathy really shaped how we managed crisis with hospitals and providers across the country during the pandemic. In the world of risk and insurance, the instinct can be to protect liability. And I recall during COVID, the number one concern from the sector was, is our insurer going to cover us for communicable diseases like COVID? And with all the risk, the answer was absolutely yes, we're going to be here for you. And having empathy, I think, helped us shift the question from who's at fault here to what can we learn together? And it's that shift that builds trust and that trust that turns risk into resilience. In my current role here at PEO, again, empathy is how we're redefining what regulatory excellence looks like. For decades, regulators were seen as the enforcers, right? The distant, procedural, even punitive organizations that protect the public and may bring that sort of hard process to those that we regulate. But empathy does allow us to regulate with people, not to people. And it helps us navigate conflict with a lot of transparency. It helps us lead through legislative reform with compassion. And I do think it helps build a culture where accountability and kindness can coexist together. And so, taking you through a couple of organizations that I've been able to work with, and empathy has not been a reaction to the disruption in this instance or these instances. It's been the strategy that allows us to transform through it.
I always say that fear, a sense of forcefulness, and more of like an authoritarian type of leadership approach is the easy way out. And the reason why I say that is because it takes so much more skill and effort to take a tempered, aware, grounded, empathetic approach because a lot of what we're primed in terms of how to respond, especially when we've been under a tremendous amount of pressure and stress over long periods of time. And people leaders, they face that. The big problems, these epic problems, it can be a lot. And it can be a lot, especially over a long period of time. And that it could just be easier to become triggered or to take that reactionary response. And what I'm hearing from you is that empathy allows a little bit of that slowing down, allows the deep listening that is so needed right now for innovative thinking, builds that sense of trust, which is needed to move through change, which is a very fearful process for so many people. And I think it also allows us to really develop that sense of transparency because we're creating a conversation. You're actually allowing there to be that co-creation of building awareness around what are the systems that we're engaged in right now? What are these processes? Okay, how can we take an eagle's eye view and understand them really clearly and see what we can work with? And it's really interesting when you think about, let's just say AI, which is a dominating topic right now, that I don't foresee that anytime in the near future where that type of context and that ability to see in that way will be able to be emulated in technology and in the immediate front. And something that I'm hearing as well is that I think now is one of these times of disruption. And by being able to bring a more empathetic stance, it's if anything, it's even more amplified the need for it so that we can be skillful during this time. And I think to be really careful of perhaps having that knee jerk reaction of let's just adopt this really quickly, let's bring forward change and transformation without considering the impact. And maybe just riffing off of that a little bit, what could be the impact? What could be the negative consequence from your perspective of perhaps bringing forward these AI transformations into organizations, specifically as it relates to the impact on the people and the impact on the organization at large?
Yeah. I think people will become disengaged. What I find sometimes is, I see my young children sometimes putting a question that they have for school into AI just to see what the response would be. And I have to remind them that go back to the textbook, read the story so that you could, as you mentioned, you could see the bird's eye view, you understand the system, you understand the context. And I think there is still very much an appreciation for understanding the bigger picture. And I think if we rely on AI too much, it sort of disengages folks from what it is that they're doing. It takes away from the innovation. It takes away from that sort of creativity, the growth mindset. And so, in a world where we're trying to encourage the growth mindset and transformation and being creative and finding purpose in your role and ensuring that you understand how your purpose here at the organization aligns to, let's say, our strategic plan. If we're going to rely so heavily on a machine, an application to just keep giving us the responses, I feel like that sense of ownership and creativity will sort of gnaw away at that overall engagement. And I do think that there will be that sort of disengaged atmosphere that will creep up. And so, for example, here we're taking a very slow approach to implementing AI on the inside and thinking about basic routine things, routine activities that we do that don't re- that don't require that context or the innovation. Something like setting up a weekly team meeting or making sure that your calendar is optimized so that you've got small breaks in between meetings. Things like that that don't require context or creativity are, I think, great opportunities for an application like AI, but I wouldn't want it to take away from that inspirational joie de vivre, joie of why you come to work, that joy, the joy in work aspect. And that's, I think, what's really scary for me as a leader of the organization.